You open your eyes to a soft light filtering through curtains that barely move in the morning air. The transition from dreams to waking is gentle, like stepping from one room to another without fully closing the door behind you. The ceiling above you holds shadows you've memorized over countless mornings, tiny imperfections that have become familiar landmarks in your daily return to consciousness. The sheets against your skin retain the warmth of sleep cotton, worn soft from years of washing. Outside, the world is beginning without your permission or participation. Birds exchange their morning observations, a conversation you can hear but never fully understand. Your body remembers before your mind does. The slight stiffness in your lower back, the way your right shoulder carries tension from yesterday. You exist in this liminal space between sleep and full awareness, where thoughts are still formless and time feels suspended. The room holds the scent of yesterday, a lingering trace of the bread you baked, the faint sweetness of the tea you drank before bed, the indefinable scent that belongs only to you and the spaces you inhabit. The wooden floor waits patient and cool for your feet to make first contact with the day. You notice how the light changes as clouds pass outside, alterations in brightness that play across the wall opposite your bed. These subtle shifts have been happening every morning of your life, whether you've been awake to witness them or not. There is comfort in this realization. The world continues its gentle rotations without requiring your attention. The pillow holds the impression of your head, a temporary fossil of your dreams. You've learned that these first moments of consciousness are sacred in their ordinariness, that the boundary between sleeping and waking is where you are most honestly yourself. You listen to the house around you, the almost imperceptible creaking of wood adjusting to temperature changes, the distant sound of water moving through pipes, the refrigerator humming its single-note song. These sounds form the background music of your existence, so familiar that you only notice them in their absence. Your breath finds its daytime rhythm. Inhale, the cool morning air fills your lungs. Exhale, you release the night. This exchange has happened millions of times in your life, yet each breath remains a small miracle of continuity. You know that once you move, the spell of this in-between time will break. The day will begin its forward momentum, carrying you along. But for now, you allow yourself to rest in this moment of pure being, where you're nothing more and nothing less than a body awakening to another day, a consciousness returning to itself, a human being simply existing in the quiet light of morning. The blanket weighs on you with reassuring presence. You've awakened like this thousands of times, yet there remains something profound in the daily resurrection of consciousness. Each morning is both routine and extraordinary. The familiar made new, again through the simple fact of continued existence. You've learned that waking is an art form, one that requires no talent except presence, the ability to receive the day rather than reach for it, to allow awareness to bloom at its own pace, unfurling like the gradual opening of a flower to sunlight. You carry more than just the physical items in your pockets or bag. You carry the weight of yesterday's conversations unfinished and lingering in the back of your mind. Words you should have said, words you're glad you didn't. The slight tension in your jaw is the physical manifestation of thoughts held back. The leather of your bag has worn smooth in places where your fingers habitually touch it. The strap has conformed to the exact curve of your shoulder, a daily companion that has gradually shaped itself to you as you have shaped yourself to your life. Inside are the practical tools of your existence, keys that jingle with a sound unique to you, a wallet containing not just currency, but small artifacts of identity receipts that map your recent movements through the world. You carry memories in your body, the scar on your left thumb from the kitchen accident years ago, the slight ache in your knee that predicts rain, the callus on your middle finger where pens and pencils have rested throughout your life. These are the physical records of your journey stories written in skin and bone. The weight of your phone in your pocket has become so familiar that its absence feels like a phantom limb. It connects you to people across distances, yet sometimes disconnects you from those sitting beside you. This small device carries your digital life, photographs, messages, records of conversations that once floated through air as sound waves and now exist as data. Your shoulders hold tension, accumulated through years of leaning forward toward desks, screens, conversations, the future. Sometimes when you roll them back, you can feel the release of pressure you didn't realize you were carrying. The small pop of vertebrae realigning reminds you that your body remembers postures you've forgotten adopting. The scent of your morning coffee lingers on your breath, a comfort carried through the early hours. The faint trace of soap on your skin marks you as someone who began the day with the ritual of cleansing, of preparation for being seen by others. You carry habits formed over decades, the way you twist your hair when thinking, how you tap your fingers in a specific pattern when waiting, the route you take through familiar spaces, always stepping on the same floorboards, creating pathways of use through your environment. In your mind, you carry a map of concerns, some immediate and practical, others existential and vast. The unpaid bill, the friend who seemed distant yesterday, the larger questions about purpose and meaning that surface in quiet moments. These thoughts have weight, though they cannot be measured on any scale. You've learned to carry contradictions, the desire for connection alongside the need for solitude, ambition balanced with contentment, the knowledge of your insignificance in the universe, coupled with the undeniable significance of your existence to those who love you. The music you heard this morning travels with you, a melody that surfaces periodically throughout the day, sometimes just a fragment of rhythm or a single phrase that repeats in the background of your thoughts. These internal soundtracks color your hours in ways you rarely consciously notice. Your pockets contain the small archaeology of daily life, a receipt from yesterday's lunch, a smooth stone picked up during last weekend's walk, a single button found on the sidewalk whose origin remains a mystery. These objects are without value to anyone else, yet they form the breadcrumb trail of your recent existence. You carry invisible inheritances, gestures from your father, your mother's way of laughing beliefs formed in childhood that operate beneath the surface of conscious thought. These legacies move through you into the world without your awareness, connecting you to a lineage of behaviors and perceptions that stretch backward through generations. The weight of decisions not yet made accompanies you, possibilities that exist in potential choices that will become the architecture of your future self. Each option carries its own gravity, pulling you subtly in different directions as you move through your day. You've learned that what you carry changes you physically. The bag strap that wears a groove in your shoulder, the wallet that creates an imbalance in your sitting posture, the phone that bends your neck downward. Your possessions possess you in subtle ways, reshaping your body through daily interaction. Light finds you in different ways throughout the day. Morning light is tentative questioning, slipping through blinds to place thin, bright lines across your floor. You've watched these lines shift position over countless mornings, a slow-moving sundial marking the passage of hours before you fully engage with the day. Midday light is more assertive, filling spaces, completely eliminating shadows, revealing dust particles that dance in still air. This is honest light that shows things as they are. The small imperfections in your skin, the faded areas of carpet, the water spots on glasses you thought were clean. You've learned not to fear this revealing light, but to appreciate its clarity, its refusal to soften reality. You notice how afternoon light carries a different quality, warmer, more golden, seeming to emanate from objects themselves rather than just illuminate them. The worn wooden handle of a drawer, unremarkable in morning light, becomes almost luminous in late afternoon, revealing depths of color and texture invisible at other hours. Light reflects off water in the glass on your table, casting rippling patterns on the wall that shift with imperceptible air currents. These ephemeral light forms exist for moments, only unique compositions that will never be exactly replicated. You've learned to appreciate these fleeting displays, to see them as tiny performances staged for no audience but the mindful observer. The light through leaves creates a dappled effect on the ground beneath trees, a natural mosaic that shifts with the wind. Walking through these patterns feels like moving through a different element, neither fully in sunlight nor shadow, but in some intermediate space where both exist simultaneously. You've noticed how light changes the color of ordinary objects, how the blue mug appears almost gray in early morning, vibrant at noon, and takes on an almost purple tone in evening light. This same mug, unchanged in its physical properties, is transformed through its relationship with different qualities of light throughout the day. Light reveals textures, the weave of fabric, the grain of wood, the subtle topography of paper. Under direct light, the world becomes more tactile even to the eyes alone. You've learned to see with your fingers this way, to understand surfaces through how light catches and reflects from their minute variations. Shadows have their own presence, not just as absence of light, but as entities with shape, movement, and relationship to the objects that cast them. Your own shadow accompanies you through sunlit spaces, sometimes stretched and distorted, sometimes a compact echo of your form, a companion made of darkness that never leaves while light remains. You notice how interior light differs from natural light, how lamps create islands of illumination with clear boundaries, unlike the gradual transitions of daylight. These artificial suns establish different territories within your home after dark, influencing where activities can comfortably take place, creating rooms within rooms defined not by walls, but by the reach of light. Light through closed eyelids creates a warm redness, a reminder that even in moments of rest or meditation, light finds ways to reach you. This inner illumination connects you to the external world, even when you've temporarily withdrawn from active engagement with it. The reflection of light in another person's eyes creates tiny landscapes, miniature worlds, containing the room, the window, the sky beyond, all curved around the dark center of the pupil. These reflections are reminders of how each person contains their own perspective, their own version of the shared environment. You've learned that light is never static. It breathes through the day, expanding and contracting, shifting in quality and direction. To observe these changes is to witness time itself made visible, to understand change not as a concept, but as a perpetual condition of existence. The relationship between light and shadow teaches balance, how neither can exist without the other, how edges and boundaries are defined by the meeting of illumination and darkness. This interplay mirrors the necessary contrasts in life itself. Joy understood through knowledge of sorrow, connection meaningful because of solitude. You've come to recognize that you are always both receiving and reflecting light, both illuminated and casting shadows. This exchange places you in constant relationship with your environment, a silent conversation of visibility and perception that continues whether you're conscious of it or not. Your hands remember what your mind forgets. They know the exact pressure needed to turn the stiff key in the front door, lock a movement so practiced it requires no thought, the slight lift before turning the precise angle. Your fingers perform this small ballet without consultation with your conscious mind. The keyboard beneath your fingertips has shaped itself to your particular rhythm. Some keys are worn smooth, their letters faded from use. The E, the T, the A, while others remain pristine, seldom touched. Your hands move across this landscape with a musician's precision, muscle memory, translating thought to written word through pathways established over years of repetition. You notice how your hands anticipate, reaching for the light switch in a dark room without hesitation, finding it unerringly despite the absence of visual cues. They know the geography of your home in a way that exists beneath language, a knowledge embedded in nerves and tendons rather than thought. Your hands carry history. The small scar at the base of your thumb from the cooking accident 5 years ago. The slight curve of your right index finger from holding pens a certain way throughout your life. The barely visible callus on your ring finger where a wedding band once rested. These are physical archives of your lived experience stories written in skin and bone. When you pick up a familiar cup, your fingers adjust to its weight and balance before your conscious mind has registered its presence. This conversation between object and body happens in microseconds, a negotiation of physics managed by unconscious intelligence. You've noticed how your hands speak when words fail, how they move in emphasis during conversation, how they flutter in moments of uncertainty, how they become still in deep attention. This silent vocabulary communicates what verbal language sometimes cannot, expressing nuances, a feeling that exists beneath the threshold of naming, the sensation of water running over your hands while washing dishes connects you to a primal pleasure. The temperature transition from cool to warm, the slickness of soap, the transformed texture of skin when wet. This simple task engages your tactile sense, completely temporarily narrowing your world to immediate physical sensation. Your hands remember seasonal changes, how they tighten in cold weather, how joints that move freely in summer become slightly reluctant in winter. They record atmospheric conditions, responding to humidity and pressure in ways your conscious mind might not register. When you touch another person, a handshake, a caress, a supportive grip on a shoulder, your hands become instruments of connection, transmitting and receiving information simultaneously. The temperature of their skin, the firmness of their response, the duration of contact, all communicate beneath the level of words. Your hands know materials intimately, how cotton differs from linen, how ripe fruit yields differently than unripe, how the pages of a new book feel compared to one read many times. This library of textures informs your interaction with the physical world, creating preferences and aversions based on tactile experience rather than intellectual assessment. You've observed how your hands calm in repetitive tasks, kneading, bread folding laundry, weeding a garden. These rhythmic movements seem to soothe not just your hands, but your entire nervous system, creating a meditative state through physical engagement with the material world. The tools you use regularly have shaped your hands as much as your hands have worn the tools. The wooden spoon, with its handle polished by years of use. The pen that fits perfectly between your fingers. These objects and your body have co-evolved, adapting to each other through consistent interaction. Your hands age differently than your face, showing time's passage through changes in texture resilience and the increasingly visible map of veins beneath thinning skin. They often look older than you feel, carrying the evidence of use that your internal sense of self doesn't acknowledge. You've learned that your hands possess their own form of wisdom, a direct, unmediated relationship with the physical world that bypasses conceptual understanding. When allowed to move without excessive direction from your analytical mind, they often find solutions to practical problems through exploration rather than planning. The ordinary world speaks in a constant symphony that often goes unheard. The refrigerator's hum forms a bass line in your kitchen, so consistent that you only notice it when it stops the sudden silence, alerting you to change more effectively than the sound itself ever did. Water moves through your home in different voices. The rushed torrent of a shower, the measured filling of a kettle, the rhythmic dripping of a faucet not quite closed. Each liquid movement creates its own acoustic signature, telling stories of pressure, volume, and containment. You've learned to identify the footsteps of different people in your life, the quick, light tread of one, the deliberate heaviness of another. These movement patterns are as distinctive as voices, personalized rhythms that announce presence before visual confirmation. The sound of your own breathing changes throughout the day, a barometer of your internal state. The deep, slow breaths of concentration, the slightly held breath of anxiety, the satisfied exhale after completion of a task. Your lungs conduct an ongoing conversation with the air, audible if you choose to listen. Wind through leaves creates different textures of sound depending on the type of tree. The sharp rustling of poplar leaves with their flat stems that cause them to tremble in the slightest breeze. The deeper susurration of oak, the whispering of pine needles. These distinctions form a subtle geography of sound in natural spaces. The sounds of cooking map the transformation of ingredients. The sizzle when cold vegetables meet hot oil. The change in tone as water moves from simmer to boil, the snap of onions being chopped, the rhythmic thud of a knife against a cutting board. These acoustic markers guide the process even when you're not consciously attending to them. Doors and drawers in your home have distinct voices, some closing with a decisive click, others with a drawn-out creak, each revealing something about the materials, construction, and history of use. These small architectural utterances form the vocabulary of your daily movement through space. Your own voice resonates differently in various rooms. Fuller in the bathroom, with its hard reflective surfaces, more absorbed in spaces with upholstered furniture and curtains. This relationship between sound and environment creates subtle shifts in how you experience your own speech throughout the day. Electronic devices form a chorus of mechanical sounds. The fan in your computer whirring to life the microwaves, beep marking, completed to time. The specific tone of your phone's notifications. These technological voices have integrated into the ambient soundtrack of contemporary existence. Pages turning in a book produce a soft, fluttering sound, subtle, yet distinct from any other movement of paper. This gentle acoustic marker has accompanied human thought and story for centuries, a sound bridging countless private moments of absorption across time. Rain creates different sounds depending on what it falls upon. The sharp tapping against windows, the muted drumming on soil, the complex patter on leaves, the hollow resonance on the roof. These variations transform a single weather event into multiple, simultaneous acoustic experiences. The sound of silence is never truly silent. There is always the sound of your own heartbeat, the rush of blood in your ears, the almost imperceptible movement of air in your lungs. True silence exists only as a concept, never as lived experience. For the embodied human, morning sounds differ from evening sounds in subtle ways. Birdsong has different qualities at dawn than at dusk. Traffic builds and diminishes in predictable patterns. The collective human activity in your neighborhood follows daily rhythms audible through open windows. You've noticed how certain sounds trigger emotional responses, how the distant siren raises momentary alarm, how the sound of certain music can immediately transport you to specific memories, how a particular intonation in a loved one's voice can soothe or concern you without the meaning of their words being processed. There are places where time seems to move differently, expanding and contracting, according to laws not recognized by clocks. The waiting room at the doctor's office, where minutes stretch into elastic units of anticipation. The space between ordering coffee and receiving it, a brief eternity, measured in the barista's efficient movements. You've found that time slows in the presence of water, beside lakes, rivers, oceans. Something about the continuous movement that never progresses, the perpetual arriving and departing of waves, or current creates a temporal bubble where the urgent demands of scheduled life temporarily suspend. Libraries hold their own time zone among the shelves of books, each containing worlds that exist outside chronological sequence. Hours can pass while seeming like minutes. The quality of silence, not absence of sound, but absence of hurry alters your perception of duration. Early mornings before the collective awakening of your neighborhood offer expanded moments. The time between 5 and 6 a.m. somehow contains more space than the same hour later in the day. The light is different, bluer clearer, and actions unfold in a deliberate pace, impossible to maintain once the day's momentum builds. You've noticed how time behaves differently during power outages, how the sudden absence of humming appliances and artificial light resets your internal clock to a slower rhythm. Conversations deepen candles, mark time through their gradual shortening, and sleep arrives earlier, more naturally. Certain cafes seem designed for temporal distortion. The one with worn leather chairs and no Wi-Fi where you've spent afternoons that felt simultaneously brief and endless. The staff never hurry customers, and something about the quality of light through the windows creates the sense of suspended animation. Time stretches in gardens, not the manicured type, requiring constant maintenance, but the wilder spaces where plants are allowed their own pace of growth. Sitting among such autonomous life forms adjusts your sense of urgency, reminding you of timescales that make human schedules seem arbitrary. You've experienced how time expands in the moment before sleep, the hypnagogic state, where thoughts become fluid, where 15 minutes can contain elaborate narratives that would require hours to describe upon waking. This boundary space operates by different temporal rules than either full wakefulness or deep sleep. Train journeys create their own temporal reality, the landscape passing at a consistent speed, the gentle, rocking motion, the sense of being both in motion and at rest simultaneously. Hours on trains seem to expand, to accommodate deeper thought, as if the steady rhythm of wheels on tracks alters brainwaves toward contemplation. You've discovered personal rituals that slow time, the careful preparation of tea following steps that cannot be rushed. The water must boil completely. The leaves must steep precisely long enough. The first sip must be taken with full attention. These deliberate actions create a pocket of unhurried existence within otherwise busy days. Certain conversations have their own chronology, those rare exchanges where connection is so complete that external time seems irrelevant. You emerge from such dialogues, surprised by the clock having experienced a different duration than the one measured by mechanical means. Time behaves unusually during illness, the liminal space of fever or recovery, where days blend together, where sleep and wakefulness become less distinct, where the body's needs rather than social obligations dictate rhythm. There is a strange liberation in this biological time, despite its discomforts. You've observed that creative flow alters temporal perception, how hours pass unnoticed when engaged in making, writing, composing, or any activity that fully absorbs attention. This state isn't timelessness exactly, but a different relationship with time, one based on immersion rather than measurement. Museums offer another temporal domain, especially the less crowded rooms of large institutions where sitting before a single painting can expand moments into contemplative depths. Something about the collective agreement to move slowly, to truly see, rather than merely look, creates an alternate timescape within public space. The most important things often go unsaid, You feel this truth in the weighted silence after a significant conversation when words have carried you to the edge of what language can express but no further. What remains hovers in the air between people, acknowledged through a glance, a slight nod, a hand briefly touching another. There are entire vocabularies of gesture that speak without sound. How a parent's hand automatically reaches to steady a child on stairs, requiring no conscious thought. How longtime partners develop synchronized movements in shared spaces, a choreography of consideration evolved over years. These physical communications contain meanings that would diminish if forced into words. You've experienced how rooms hold emotional residue after arguments or celebrations, an atmospheric tension or lightness that new visitors can sense upon entering, though they couldn't name its source. These spatial memories exist below the threshold of language, yet communicate clearly to those attuned to such subtle frequencies. Between close friends, entire conversations can happen through what remains unmentioned. Topics deliberately sidestepped, questions unasked. Out of respect for privacy or pain, these negative spaces in dialogue are themselves a form of communication boundaries, acknowledged through mutual restraint. The slight hesitation before answering a question often contains more truth than the words that follow. You've learned to listen for these microscopic pauses, the almost imperceptible gathering of thought that precedes speech, especially when difficult emotions are being navigated. Objects carry silent histories. The chipped teacup kept because it belonged to someone loved the uncomfortable chair nobody sits in but nobody discards. These items speak without language about attachment memory, the invisible threads connecting present to past. Their continued presence in your space communicates what might be too complex or painful to articulate. You've noticed how touch communicates what words cannot. The specific pressure of a hand on a shoulder, conveying encouragement, concern, warning, or affection through almost imperceptible variations. The body understands these messages instantly, translating physical contact into emotional information without conscious processing. Weather changes are felt before they're seen. The shift in air pressure before rain, the particular quality of light preceding snow. Your body registers these atmospheric communications at a level beneath verbal thought, responding to environmental signals through subtle alterations in mood and energy that you might attribute to other causes. The space between musical notes contains as much meaning as the notes themselves. How the briefest hesitation before a phrase can convey yearning, how the silence after a final chord allows the composition to resonate within the listener. You've experienced how these musical spaces create emotional responses that elude precise description. You've learned that what people repeatedly don't talk about reveals as much as what they do discuss. The subjects that remain conspicuously absent from certain relationships, the experiences referenced only indirectly. These deliberate omissions form a kind of inverse map of what matters most deeply. Dreams communicate in their own grammar of symbol and emotion, delivering messages that feel profoundly significant, yet resist translation into waking language. Upon attempting to describe a particularly vivid dream, you've experienced how the essential meaning seems to evaporate as words attempt to capture the uncapturable. The way someone arranges their living space speaks volumes about their internal landscape. Priorities revealed through what objects are displayed prominently or hidden away, what areas receive the most attention or neglect. These spatial arrangements communicate values and preoccupations more honestly than deliberate self-description. You've noticed how animals understand intentions through barely perceptible signals, how a dog knows your mood before you've acknowledged it yourself, how birds respond to the slightest shift in posture. This realm of nonverbal communication reminds you of a more primal understanding that exists beneath the relatively recent human development of language. The quality of silence between people varies enormously. There is the comfortable quiet of deep familiarity, the charged silence of unresolved tension, the respectful stillness of shared appreciation, the awkward emptiness of disconnection. These different textures of wordlessness constitute their own emotional vocabulary, articulating relationship states with remarkable precision. Waiting has its own distinct textures, as varied as fabric. There's the scratchy impatience of waiting in line at a government office, fluorescent lights humming overhead, numbered tickets clutched in restless hands. This waiting feels like wool against sensitive skin, necessary but irritating, leaving a residue of frustration even after it ends. Then there's the silk-smooth anticipation of waiting for someone beloved to arrive. How time simultaneously drags and rushes, how your senses heighten to catch the first indication of their presence. The sound of a car door closing in the distance, footsteps on the path. This waiting shimmers with possibility, alive with expectation. You've experienced the cotton-soft waiting of early morning, sitting with the first cup of coffee before the day properly begins, watching light gradually strengthen outside the window. This waiting asks nothing, expects nothing, simply creates space for the world to arrive at its own pace. Hospital waiting holds a different texture entirely, dense and heavy as wet clay, malleable yet resistant. Minutes stretch into hours as you sit beneath institutional lighting, surrounded by others similarly suspended between before and after, all of you existing in the liminal space of not yet knowing. You've noticed how waiting for sleep has its own particular quality, the conscious mind gradually loosening its grip, thoughts becoming less linear, the body softening into the mattress. This waiting requires surrender rather than effort, a gradual relinquishing of control that paradoxically becomes more difficult the more it's pursued. The waiting between sending an important message and receiving a response carries a unique tension. Checking devices becomes compulsive. Ordinary activities continue, but with divided attention, a portion of awareness constantly alert for the notification sound. This waiting creates a thin layer of distraction over everything else. You felt the peculiar texture of waiting for creative inspiration, the mixture of receptivity and effort, of active passivity, like waiting for a shy animal to approach it requires both attention and the appearance of being occupied elsewhere. Too direct a focus, and it retreats complete inattention, and it passes unnoticed. Seasonal waiting has its own rhythm, the anticipation of first snowfall, of spring's initial green shoots, of summer's longest day, of autumn's turning leaves. These cyclical periods of expectation connect you to larger patterns, reminding you that some waitings are ancient, shared across generations and cultures. You've experienced the textured waiting of cooking, how different processes cannot be rushed, how ingredients transform at their own pace, the slow caramelization of onions, bread dough rising, flavors melding in a simmering soup. These waitings reward patience, with deeper complexity teaching that time itself can be an essential ingredient. The waiting room at a doctor's office has its own sensory landscape. Magazines with curled corners, the particular smell of disinfectant barely masking human anxiety, the muted conversations at the reception desk. Here waiting feels institutional, a collective experience of vulnerability, barely contained by administrative systems. You've noticed how waiting changes with age, how childhood waiting for special occasions felt interminable, while adult waiting seems to compress time rather than extend it. The months before a planned trip now pass with alarming speed weeks folding into each other like accordion pleats. Technology has created new textures of waiting. The progress bar that offers precise measurement of remaining time, the typing indicator showing someone composing a message, the buffer wheel spinning while content loads. These visual representations of duration create a different relationship with time's passage than the unmarked waiting of earlier eras. You've felt the bittersweet texture of waiting for something you know will end. The final weeks of summer, the last days before a friend moves away, the concluding chapters of a beloved book. This waiting carries a poignant awareness of impermanence, a simultaneous desire for time to both slow and advance. The quality of waiting differs profoundly depending on whether the outcome is known. Waiting for a train that will certainly arrive versus waiting for news that could be either good or bad. The first allows the mind to rest in certainty despite delay. The second creates a restless scanning of possibilities, a continuous preparation for different emotional responses. Stillness has its own language, articulating what movement cannot. You've noticed this in the quiet hour before dawn, when even the air seems to pause, holding its breath before the day begins. In this suspended moment, thoughts arise with a clarity impossible during the rushed hours that follow. The stillness of an empty room communicates differently than the stillness of a space where someone sits in perfect quietude. The first speaks of absence, potential waiting. The second creates a field of presence, attention, the deliberate choice to remain unmoving in a world obsessed with constant activity. You've experienced how stillness reveals subtle sounds, usually masked by movement, the almost imperceptible settling of a house, the distant calls of birds, the soft mechanical hum of refrigerators and heating systems that form the baseline acoustics of modern existence. To become still is to expand the auditory world. In museums, you've observed how different people approach stillness, some moving quickly from artwork to artwork, as if checking items off a list, others standing motionless before a single painting for 20 minutes or more. This capacity for sustained visual attention creates a different relationship with art, allowing details and relationships to emerge that remain invisible to the constantly moving eye. The stillness of deep night carries its own emotional tone, different from the stillness of early morning, though both might share similar qualities of quiet. Night stillness speaks of conclusion, rest, the necessary pause between days. Morning stillness suggests possibility, renewal, the gathering of energy before expression. You've noticed how the quality of your own internal stillness affects your perception, how a restless mind seems to generate a restless world while cultivated. Inner quiet reveals patterns and connections previously undetected. This relationship between inner and outer stillness suggests they might not be separate phenomena, but aspects of a single state. The deliberate stillness of meditation differs from the enforced stillness of waiting for a delayed appointment. One expands with purpose and attention, the other contracts with impatience and frustration. The outward appearance might be identical, a person sitting quietly, while the internal experience creates entirely different realities. You've experienced moments when collective stillness descends on a group, during a powerful musical performance, perhaps, or after shared news of significance. These unified pauses in normal activity create a field of heightened awareness, an almost tangible shift in the atmosphere that connects individuals through shared attention. Natural environments teach different qualities of stillness. The dense quiet of forests, where sound is absorbed by vegetation, the expansive silence of deserts, where emptiness itself seems to communicate the paradoxical stillness found within, the constant motion of oceans. Each landscape offers its own school of quiet. You've noticed how stillness affects time perception, how minutes pass differently when you're completely motionless compared to when you're physically active. This temporal shifting suggests that movement and time are more intricately connected than ordinary awareness recognizes. The stillness between people who know each other well communicates as clearly as conversation. Comfortable silences that require no filling attentive quiet, that holds space for whatever might need expression. These shared still moments often contain more intimacy than exchanges of words. You've experienced how creative insights often arrive during stillness rather than effort, the solution appearing not while actively pursuing it, but during the shower, the walk, the moment of gazing out a window. This pattern suggests that stillness creates conditions for connections that directed thinking cannot access. The stillness of objects carries its own presence. How a carefully arranged vase of flowers, an empty chair, or a book left open can seem to radiate a quiet energy that influences the atmosphere of an entire room. These still lifes speak without words about attention, intention, and the human tendency to find meaning in arrangement. You've noticed how your capacity for stillness has changed throughout your life, perhaps diminishing with the responsibilities and technologies of adulthood, perhaps deepening through deliberate practice or the wisdom of experience. This evolution reflects changing relationships with time attention and the perceived necessity of constant activity. Rain carries knowledge accumulated through its cycle, rising from oceans, gathering in clouds, falling to earth, returning to sea. Each drop has been whale song and steam ice crystal and river current, prehistoric ocean and morning dew. When rain speaks against your window pane, it speaks with the memory of all water everywhere. You've noticed how rain changes the acoustic landscape, creating a background wash of sound that softens other noises. Traffic becomes less harsh voices, less distinct. This auditory transformation alters your perception of space. The world seems simultaneously smaller, more intimate, and yet more connected across distance by the continuous percussion of falling water. Different surfaces receive rain with their own voices, the sharp tapping against glass, the muted drumming on soil, the complex patter on leaves, the hollow resonance on rooftops. These variations transform a single weather event into multiple simultaneous performances, a symphony of contact between sky and earth. Rain knows the contours of landscapes in ways maps cannot convey. It finds the subtle depressions where puddles will form the almost imperceptible slopes that guide its flow, the hidden channels carved by previous waters. Watching rain move across terrain reveals topographies invisible during dry weather. You've observed how rain creates temporary communities. People huddled under awnings, sharing umbrella space, exchanging glances of commiseration at bus stops. These momentary connections, formed through shared circumstances rather than choice, dissolve when the clouds part, leaving faint impressions of encounter. The smell of approaching rain, petrichor, communicates directly to ancient parts of your brain, triggering responses that precede language. This scent of earth meeting water speaks of fertility relief, the breaking of drought survival itself. Your body understands this message at a cellular level. Rain transforms urban spaces, creating reflective surfaces that double the visual world. Streetlights stretch into wavering columns on wet pavement. Buildings appear to melt into their own images. This mirrored dimension reveals the city as simultaneously more magical and more vulnerable than its dry weather version. You've experienced how rain alters time perception, how a rainy Sunday afternoon seems to contain more hours than its sunny counterpart, how the rhythm of rainfall can slow your internal clock, creating space for contemplation that the clear sky world rarely offers. Rain knows intimacy with everything it touches, conforming perfectly to leaf-stone skin glass, leaving no space between itself and the touched surface. This complete contact without gap or separation demonstrates a form of relationship beyond the capabilities of solid matter, a total acceptance of what is encountered. The sound of rain, while falling asleep, creates a boundary between consciousness and dreams, a transitional soundtrack that accompanies the mind's movement between states. This gentle percussion against windows and roofs has lulled humans to sleep for all of history, a primordial lullaby. You've noticed how rain changes not just the appearance, but the behavior of living things. Cats become philosophical by windows, dogs more reluctant about walks, birds fall quiet except for occasional declarations. Between showers, plants visibly respond with a different quality of alertness. These altered patterns reveal the interconnectedness of weather and consciousness. Rain remembers its oceanic origins in its tendency to seek the lowest point, to gather with other raindrops, to eventually return to vastness. This water memory, the pull toward reunion with its greater self, mirrors human longing for connection, for return to something larger than individual existence. The rain knows patience, how to wait in cloud form until conditions allow release, how to persist through drought, how to work slowly through soil toward roots, how to gradually reshape stone over centuries. Watching rain, you're reminded that the most powerful forces often work not through sudden force, but through gentle persistence. You've experienced how rain creates sanctuary, the particular comfort of being indoors during a downpour, the contrast between external turbulence and internal shelter the permission rainfall seems to grant for introversion rest turning inward. Few weather conditions so clearly delineate the boundaries between inside and outside, creating distinct emotional territories. Between each exhale and the next inhale lies a small pause, a moment of perfect stillness when the body is neither releasing nor gathering air. You've noticed that extending this pause, even by fractions of seconds, creates a curious spaciousness in your mind, as if the brief cessation of breath allows thoughts to settle like disturbed sediment in water. These pauses between breaths exist as doorways to a different quality of awareness, not quite meditation, but a step removed from ordinary consciousness. In this suspended moment, you sometimes glimpse how continuously your mind produces thoughts, how relentlessly it narrates experience, and how this narration is distinct from the experience itself. You've observed that during emotional intensity, whether joy, grief, or fear, these spaces between breaths often vanish completely. The breath becomes shallow, continuous without pause, returning awareness to the natural gaps between inhale and exhale can moderate these emotional storms, creating small sanctuaries of calm within turmoil. The quality of silence in a room changes when you attend to these interbreath spaces. External sounds become more distinct, yet somehow less intrusive. The mechanical hum of appliances, distant traffic, the neighbor's muffled conversation, all continue, but occupy a different relationship to your awareness when attention rests in the breath's natural rhythm. You've noticed how conversations have their own breathing, the exchange of words, followed by moments of reception, the natural cadence of speaking and listening that, when honored, creates genuine dialogue rather than parallel monologues. The most meaningful discussions often include comfortable silences, spaces between verbal breaths where meaning can deepen. Music exists as much in the spaces between notes as in the notes themselves. You've experienced how a skilled musician's phrasing, the precise lengthening or shortening of these musical breath spaces, can transform the same sequence of notes from mechanical to deeply moving. These infinitesimal decisions about timing create the difference between played notes and expressed feeling. The space between when you wake and when you rise often holds a unique quality. Consciousness present, but not yet engaged with the day's demands. This liminal territory, neither sleep nor active wakefulness, offers a perspective unavailable. Once you've fully entered the day's momentum, you've experienced how the pause between stimulus and response contains the possibility of choice. The slight space between event and reaction, someone's provocative comment, a sudden noise, an unexpected sight, can be expanded through attention, creating room for considered response rather than automatic reaction. The interval between sending an important message and receiving a reply forms its own distinct emotional space, a suspension between action and consequence intention and reception. This waiting period, regardless of its actual duration, often feels stretched and heightened, each notification sound triggering a small surge of anticipation or apprehension. You've noticed that creativity often emerges not from continuous effort, but from the alternation of focused work and deliberate pauses, the mental equivalent of spaces between breaths. Problems that resist direct attack sometimes yield solutions during walks, showers, or other activities that create distance from concentrated thinking. The moment between deciding to speak and actually speaking sometimes reveals the unnecessary nature of the planned words. In this microscopic pause, you've occasionally recognized that silence would serve better than the comment you were about to offer, allowing you to close your mouth on unspoken words without the sense of having interrupted yourself. You've observed how certain spaces facilitate the awareness of breath spaces. High ceilings in cathedrals or concert halls open horizons at shorelines or mountaintops. The particular quietude of libraries or museums. These environments seem to naturally expand the pauses between inhalation and exhalation, as if architectural or geographical spaciousness invites physiological and psychological spaciousness, the space between what you intend to do and what you actually do, the gap between aspiration and action, contains important information about priorities, fears, and unconscious patterns. Examining this space with curiosity rather than judgment has revealed motivations and obstacles invisible during either the planning or acting phases. You've experienced how the quality of attention given to the spaces between breaths affects sleep, how following these natural pauses as consciousness fades creates a different transition into sleep than the more common experience of mental activity continuing unabated until suddenly interrupted by unconsciousness. This attended transition feels like a gradual dissolving rather than an abrupt switching off. Small things carry unexpected weight. The single key in your pocket, metal worn smooth from years of turning in the same lock, is physically light, but holds the heavy significance of home security belonging. This small object connects you to place in a way few others do, its absence immediately, creating vulnerability and displacement. You've noticed how certain ordinary objects become anchors of routine and identity. The particular mug you reach for each morning, its handle fitted perfectly to your grip through hundreds of repetitions. The weight of this simple vessel extends beyond its physical mass to include the ritual. It enables the moment of pause before engagement with the world. Words, too, carry weight disproportionate to their size. A casually delivered comment that the speaker immediately forgets may lodge in your mind for days, altering your internal landscape. You look tired. From a colleague, 3 small words that somehow manage to cast a shadow over an entire afternoon. You've experienced how the absence of small things can weigh more heavily than their presence. The missing text message, the call that wasn't returned, the expected letter that didn't arrive. These negative spaces create their own gravity, pulling attention repeatedly toward what isn't there rather than what is. Small gestures accumulate invisible weight over time. The partner who always adjusts your collar before you leave, the friend who remembers how you take your coffee without asking, the colleague who saves the type of pen you prefer. These minor considerations, individually light as feathers, collectively form a substantial architecture of care. You've observed how objects inherited from loved ones carry emotional density far exceeding their material properties. The unremarkable wristwatch that was your father's, the plain scarf that belonged to your grandmother. These items contain compressed narratives, memories, connections to people, and times no longer present. The weight of decisions often inversely relates to their apparent significance. How the small choice to take one street rather than another might lead to a chance encounter that alters your life's direction, while carefully planned major decisions sometimes produce little lasting change. This disproportionate relationship between action and consequence creates both anxiety and wonder. You've noticed how small kindnesses offered without expectation of return, holding a door, sharing an umbrella, offering directions to a stranger, create ripples of effect impossible to track. These moments, light as air, in execution, may carry surprising weight in the recipient's experience, altering their perception of humanity's basic nature. The weight of what remains unsaid in conversation often exceeds what is expressed. The question not asked, the appreciation not voiced, the disagreement swallowed. These verbal omissions accumulate in relationships, sometimes preserving a harmony, sometimes creating distance through their collective mass. You've experienced how small sensory pleasures ground you in the present moment. The particular quality of afternoon light through leaves, the scent of rain on dry earth, the texture of worn wood under your palm. These fleeting perceptions, given proper attention, can briefly counterbalance larger preoccupations, offering respite from mental weight through physical immediacy. Small habits barely noticeable in isolation eventually shape major life patterns. The minute daily choice to sit or stand to speak, or remain silent to reach out or withdraw. These decisions, made hundreds of times without conscious deliberation, gradually determine health, relationships, and fundamental orientation toward existence. You've noticed how small sounds punctuate domestic space. The specific creak of a particular floorboard, the distinctive sound of the refrigerator door, closing, the unique timbre of water moving through pipes in different parts of the house. These acoustic signatures, individually insignificant, collectively create the auditory landscape of home. The weight of small possessions becomes most apparent when moving. How boxes of minor objects, individually light, create collective burden, requiring significant effort to transport. This physical reality mirrors the psychological experience of carrying accumulated mental and emotional content through life. Each thought or feeling seemingly insignificant until considered in aggregate. You've observed how small changes in weather affect collective mood, how a slightly warmer day in winter or cooler morning in summer can transform public spaces, altering the pace and tone of human interaction. These subtle atmospheric shifts, barely registrable on instruments, nevertheless exert measurable influence on behavior and perception. Sleep comes to you differently each night. Sometimes it arrives like an expected guest, punctual and welcome at the appointed hour. Your body recognizes its approach. The slight heaviness of eyelids, the gradual quieting of thought, the comfortable surrender into horizontal rest. These nights, the transition from wakefulness feels like a gentle descent, each stage of consciousness giving way to the next without resistance. Other nights, sleep behaves like a shy visitor hovering at the threshold, requiring coaxing and patience. You lie awake, while your mind cycles through the day's events, rehearses tomorrow's conversations, or generates elaborate scenarios unlikely to occur. During these restless periods, you've learned that fighting insomnia only strengthens it. Better to acknowledge the wakefulness, to treat it as a different form of rest rather than failed sleep. You've noticed how your body arranges itself for sleep in habitual patterns. Perhaps curled on your left side, one hand beneath the pillow knees, slightly bent. This position evolved through years of unconscious adjustment, creates the physical conditions that signal to your nervous system that transition to sleep is permitted. Attempting to fall asleep in an unfamiliar posture often prolongs wakefulness, as if the body requires its accustomed shape to release consciousness. The sounds of sleep vary with seasons and settings. Summer sleep is accompanied by the white noise of fans or air conditioning, creating a consistent acoustic backdrop that masks smaller disturbances. Winter sleep has its own soundtrack, the occasional clicking of heating systems, the different texture of silence created by snow-muffled exteriors. Hotel sleep carries the faint, unfamiliar noises of other guests and mechanical systems, requiring adjustment to new auditory landscapes. You've experienced how dreams vary in different phases of sleep. The hypnagogic images that appear on the border of wakefulness, often strange, but rarely narrative, the vivid, story-like sequences of REM sleep that can feel emotionally significant, even when their content is surreal. The deeper dream states that leave impressions of having occurred, but resist recall upon waking. The quality of sleep changes throughout life. The seemingly bottomless sleep of childhood, the easily interrupted sleep of parenthood, the fragmented sleep that often accompanies aging. These variations reflect not just physiological changes, but evolving relationships with consciousness itself, different negotiations between the need for restoration and the need for awareness. You've noticed how sleep is affected by the day that preceded it, how physical exertion generally deepens sleep, while emotional intensity often disrupts it, how screen time before bed creates a different quality of rest than reading printed pages, how conversations left unresolved can intrude upon dreams. The boundary between waking life and sleep is more permeable than it appears. The return from sleep happens in layers. First awareness of body and surroundings, then memory of identity and circumstance, finally the recollection of the particular day's requirements. This sequence of remembering, first that you are a body, then that you are a specific person, then that you are a person with particular responsibilities, repeats each morning a daily reconstruction of self. You've observed that sleep creates a private geography, territories of consciousness inaccessible to others, and partially inaccessible even to your waking self. Dreams visited and forgotten periods of deep unconsciousness, moments of partial waking that leave no memory. These Experiences happen to you, but remain largely unknown by you creating a curious relationship with parts of your own existence. The space where you sleep accumulates invisible residue, not just the physical traces of bodies on mattresses, but the accumulated nights of dreaming thinking resting in the same location. This concentrated history of unconsciousness seems to affect the ease of returning to sleep in familiar environments versus new ones, as if the habit of surrender in a particular place facilitates its repetition. You've noticed that sleep is contagious, how the deep, regular breathing of someone already asleep can guide your own body toward rest, how watching a cat curled in perfect abandonment to unconsciousness can prompt your own muscles to relax. This mirroring suggests sleep is not solely an individual state, but can be communally influenced, a shared surrender to biological rhythm. The moments just before falling asleep sometimes offer unusual mental clarity, problems that seemed complex during the day suddenly revealing simple solutions, creative insights arriving unbidden memories, surfacing from years past with vivid detail. This hypnagogic state, neither fully awake nor truly asleep, occasionally provides access to thoughts unavailable during normal wakefulness. You've experienced how the position of your body upon waking often tells a story of the night's journey. Blankets, rearranged pillows, relocated limbs, and configurations you wouldn't consciously choose. These physical rearrangements during unconsciousness reveal the body's continued agency even while the mind travels in dreams. The transition back to wakefulness carries its own specific feeling, the momentary disorientation of returning to physical reality, the curious way that dream logic briefly persists, even as conscious awareness returns the physical sensations of muscles awakening from immobility. This daily border crossing between states of consciousness remains one of the most common yet mysterious human experiences. What remains when everything else falls away? The small constants that anchor your days. The first cup of coffee, steam rising in the morning light. The brief exchange with the neighbor walking their dog. The familiar creak of that one floorboard near the kitchen. These minor continuities persist through personal and global upheavals, alike creating a framework of normality around which larger events revolve. You've noticed how certain sensory memories remain accessible despite time's passage, the particular quality of light in your childhood home, the specific timbre of a loved one's laugh, the texture of sand between your fingers at a beach visited decades ago. These sensory impressions sometimes return with surprising vividness, temporarily collapsing the distance between past and present. What remains unchanged within you, despite external transformations? Perhaps a core way of seeing that has persisted since childhood, a tendency toward wonder at natural beauty, a particular sensitivity to others' emotions, a stubbornness in the face of injustice. These essential orientations form the thread of continuity in your sense of self. Across decades of change, you've observed how ordinary objects accumulate meaning through continued presence in your life. The wooden spoon used for thousands of meals, the coffee mug chosen each morning from others in the cabinet, the garden bench that has weathered 10 winters outside your window. These humble items, through sheer persistence, become repositories of personal history, what remains of conversations long after their specific content fades, often just a feeling tone, warmth or tension connection, or distance, and perhaps a key phrase that continues to resonate years later. These emotional residues and verbal fragments form a kind of interpersonal sediment layers of interaction that shape your relationships without remaining consciously accessible. You've experienced how physical spaces retain traces of those who have inhabited them, not in any mystical sense, but in the subtle ways environments are shaped by repeated human presence. The worn path across a carpet, the particular arrangement of kitchen tools, reflecting established patterns of use, the height markings of growing children preserved on a door frame. These physical records of life persist even when the people who created them are absent. What remains of dreams upon waking? Rarely the narrative details, which dissolve quickly into wakefulness, but rather emotional colorations that can influence an entire day. A vague sense of disquiet from a forgotten nightmare, an inexplicable lightness following pleasant dreams whose content has vanished from memory. These emotional hangovers from unconscious experience blur the boundaries between sleeping and waking states. You've noticed how the body retains its own history, scars that map accidents or surgeries, the particular pattern of lines around your eyes that record decades of expressions, the comfortable pathways of habitual movement that become increasingly difficult to alter with age. This physical autobiography, written in flesh rather than words, tells the story of a life even when memory falters. What remains of places you've visited briefly but intensely, often sensory impressions rather than facts. The particular quality of light in a Greek village, the specific combination of spices smelled in a Moroccan market, the unique silence of a forest in snow. These sensory memories sometimes surface unexpectedly years later, triggered by similar stimuli in entirely different contexts. You've observed how language patterns from significant people in your life remain with you long after contact ends. Phrases from grandparents, the particular rhythm of a former partner's speech childhood, expressions from regions you no longer inhabit. These linguistic inheritances emerge in your own speech occasionally, connecting present expression to personal history through invisible threads of influence. What remains after loss is never simply absence, but a complex reconfiguration. The negative space, where someone or something used to be, gradually fills with memory meaning, and eventually a different relationship to what was. This transformation from immediate physical presence to internalized significance forms the essential work of grieving and integration. You've noticed how certain pieces of music or literature encountered at formative moments retain their emotional power throughout life, creating a time capsule effect where engagement with the familiar work temporarily restores earlier versions of yourself. These cultural touchstones form emotional landmarks, allowing measurement of how you've changed through your changing relationship with unchanging art. What remains at day's end when productivity and accomplishment are set aside? The simple awareness of being alive in a particular moment, in a particular place, with particular sensations. The weight of your body against the chair, the sound of distant traffic or nearby insects, the gradually diminishing light. This fundamental experience of Embodied presence underlies all more complex aspects of human existence. You've learned that what ultimately remains is neither the grand gestures nor the carefully constructed narratives about your life, but rather the accumulated weight of how you've moved through ordinary days, the small kindnesses offered or withheld, the quality of attention given to mundane moments, the degree of presence or absence you've brought to unremarkable encounters. These seemingly insignificant choices, repeated thousands of times, eventually define a life's true character and meaning.